You should be grateful we visit at all, she said at my table as if my kitchen were a charity line and not a home. The clock on the wall grew louder. Tick, tock. Steam rose from the pot like a thin veil. Cinnamon and butter tried to comfort me. They could not. Something inside me went still. I listened to my heart pause and then insist on beating again. My name is Claudia Mae Johnson. I am 66 years old. I have cooked in this kitchen for 3 decades. I have turned grief into soup and joy into cobbler. I have raised a boy into a man right here. Tonight I serve chicken with mushroom gravy and rice with peppers. I polished the crystal my mother left me. I set the good silver. I wanted peace. I wanted laughter. I wanted to believe we were still a family. Tiffany sat across from me in a red dress. Her perfume was sharp and sweet. Andre sat beside her, shoulders tight, eyes sliding away. He kept pressing the lock button on his phone. His plate was full. He had not touched it. The pudding waited in the fridge like a promise I had baked. You should be grateful we visit at all, Tiffany said again, softer now, as if kindness could dress the wound. She looked around and pressed a smile that did not reach her eyes. Your home is very cozy, she said. Maybe one day we can help you modernize. My fork stopped in mid-air. I set it down with care so the tines would not scratch the plate. The clock went on. Tick, tock. In that sound I felt the years I had given. I saw my son at 3 with fever. I saw my hands counting coins for medicine. I saw myself hemming dresses so tuition would be paid. I saw my husband Charles in the old photograph above the stove. I thought of the ring in the blue dish by the sink. A circle that once promised I would never carry a burden alone. Life taught me otherwise. Faith carried me. Are you with me, dear listener? From your table or your car, hear what I heard. Feel that pause when a line tells you respect has left the room. Tiffany lifted her glass. She dabbed her mouth with my good linen napkin. You know, my mother never lets a table look this crowded, she said. She likes everything clean and white and simple. I let the words pass. I watched Andre. His hands shook. He would not meet my eyes. My mind asked a question I did not want. When did my boy learn to hold his breath and let me drown? I stood the way a person stands when the pain has finished deciding. Not in a rush. Not with noise. Just steady. My chair moved back an inch across the floor. Then one more. I felt the ground under my feet and the wood answer with a soft sigh. I placed my hand on the table and gathered myself. The air cooled against my skin. Steam loosened and drifted away. I looked at Tiffany. Then I turned to my son. Andre, I said, tell your wife what I have been doing for the last 6 months. Tell her who paid the rent. Tell her who sent the money on the 5th day of each month so the roof above your heads did not tremble. Tell her what your mother sold to make sure the lights stayed on. My voice was low. It did not shake. It did not need to shout. Truth has its own volume. Andre stared at his hands. The lock button clicked once and then again. Tiffany raised her brows as if I had told a joke. She leaned back and crossed one leg. A smile tugged at her mouth. She was ready to be amused. The clock kept time. Tick, tock. I remembered the binder in the drawer by the stove. I remembered the receipts clipped in neat stacks. I remembered the transfers that left my account with a quiet ping and a heavier heart. I thought of the medicine bottle I stretched to make last. I thought of rice and eggs and the way a person learns to chew slowly. I thought of the ring in the blue dish and how light it felt in my palm the day I took it to the pawn shop and watched the owner weigh 30 years and not blink. Heat rose to my eyes and then fell away. I did not cry. I told myself a line I have told many women in the church kitchen when their faces crumpled over a pot of greens. Silence is not weakness. I breathed in. The room smelled like cinnamon and onion and the faint trace of someone else's perfume. Memory pressed close. So did decision. Andre, I said again. Son, look at me. Tell her the truth. Now. 6 months before that dinner, my son Andre stood at my sink and let his shoulders fall. He said he had lost his job again. The schedule changed. He missed 2 shifts. He spoke of bad luck in traffic. He did not ask for help. He did not have to. I set the kettle on and watched the blue flame speak. Andre spoke about bills and promises. He laughed the empty laugh a person gives when nothing is funny. He told me they were behind on rent and groceries and lights. He said the landlord on Hamilton Street was strict. I listened. I thought of my husband Charles, gone these 10 years, and the way he counted cash in small envelopes on Sunday night. I looked at the photo above the stove and felt him near. I have worked with my hands all my life. I sewed hems for prom dresses and tailored wedding suits. I bake sweet potato pies for church bazaars. I know how to stretch $1 until it behaves. I opened the drawer by the stove and pulled out my savings book. It was not much, but it was what I had. I told Andre to breathe. I told him rent could be handled for a little while. On the 5th of the next month I went to the bank and arranged a transfer. $1,000 left my account and landed in the landlord account with a rude little beep. Darnell at the window printed a receipt and slid it to me. He said, "Miss Johnson, you good?" I walked home with a paper that felt like a brick in my purse. I put that receipt in a folder and wrote February on the tab. I wrote the amount and the address so the truth would live somewhere. Rent turned into a rhythm. I paid in March and April and May. Each time I told myself this would be the last bridge before the shore. Each time I rearranged my month to fit the new shape. I chose rice and eggs. I watered down the milk for cornbread. I looked at the orange bottle of arthritis pills and made it stretch. When a seamstress down the block retired, I sold her machine for a little extra. The price was low. The need was high. I told myself this is what mothers do. While I counted coins, I watched Tiffany arrive for Sunday dinners in shoes that flashed like mirrors. She would kiss the air near my cheek and say, "Love your dress, Mama Claudia. Maybe it is time to update." She would pinch the fabric on the table runner and say, "My mother likes clean lines." I nodded as if the words were helpful and not a small knife. Andre would laugh too hard at something on his phone and pretend not to see me seeing him. I told myself it was only pride trying to cover a wound. One afternoon I stood at a pawn counter with my husband ring in my palm. The man behind the glass weighed it without looking at my face. I remembered Charles' warm laugh and the way he smelled like cedar and soap and peppermint. I remembered the night the doctor said the treatment had done all it could, and how we went home and ate pie in bed because we did not know what else to do but be kind to the moment we had. I closed my fingers and then let go. I kept a binder on the counter. I labeled the tabs with a black marker. Rent, utilities, food, medical. I dated every receipt and clipped them in neat stacks with little silver clips from the church office. I told myself the binder was just for order. I did not know it would become my witness when faces tried to pretend that memory is a sheet that can be shaken clean. Paper does not forget. Neither does a steady heart. There were small joys in that season. I planted marigolds in a chipped pot and watched them blaze against the porch rail in the sun. I took peach cobbler to Ms. Lorraine when her knee ached and we sat and watched boys race old bikes with new pride. Michael Jenkins wrote me a letter after he found me through an old choir friend. He had seen a photo from college where I wore a red flower dress I had sewn myself. He asked if I still sing when I cook. I wrote him back and said sometimes I hum. He told me about the ocean where he lives, and how the air smells like salt and clean wind. His voice on the phone later was kind and steady. He called me Miss Claudia and then he called me Claudia, and the way he said my name felt like a door opening. I did not tell Andre. I did not tell Tiffany. I kept that light to myself the way a person cups a match in a breeze. If you are still with me, dear listener, understand this. A woman can carry the world and still feel alone. She can keep receipts and keep faith. She can tell herself it is only one more month and mean it. She can cook a whole meal and eat almost none. She can look at her child and see both the infant she caught with her own hands and the man who has learned to look away. I chose my son each time. Love is a stubborn gardener. It plants again after frost. By the time that dinner came, I had learned how to live inside a quiet subtraction. I had learned how to make the house sing with less. I had kissed a ring goodbye and kept a promise to a child who was no longer a child. That is the backdrop you need when I tell you why the chair moved and why my voice did not tremble. I was not trying to win. I was trying to end a season that would not end. I was trying to let the light touch the places where pride had grown over truth. After the first transfers, the house grew quieter, as if the walls understood the math I was doing. Doubt moved in like a soft draft I could not see. It lifted the curtain and toyed with the flame under the kettle. I kept cooking. I kept praying under my breath. Lord, steady my hands. Lord, hold my tongue. Tiffany began to arrive with a new rhythm. She was always on time and always dressed for a photograph. Shoes bright. Nails perfect. Perfume heavy and familiar, though I could not name the brand. She would step into my kitchen, glance at the fridge magnets, and sigh as if color itself were a burden. She said my mother would redo this whole space. She likes clear counters. She likes gray and white and steel. I stirred the pot and tasted with a wooden spoon and let the words sink without a splash. Andre became a man of small disappearances. He sat at my table but his eyes were elsewhere. His phone buzzed and his thumb moved and his mouth made the empty laugh that never reached his eyes. He told me things were improving. He said a supervisor liked his work ethic. He said a neighbor promised a referral. He said next month would be better. I heard hope, but it sounded like a story a boy tells to stay out of trouble for one more day. There were signs. Tiffany posted a photo from a rooftop brunch with 3 friends and a plate that looked like a painting. She wore a white blazer and gold hoops. The caption said blessings and work hard, play hard. Ms. Lorraine saw the photo too. She tapped her phone and shook her head and said, "Child, that girl loves a camera." Then she rubbed her knee and asked for a little more peach cobbler. And we laughed because sometimes laughter is the only spoon that fits the mouth of a hard day. Packages began to arrive at their building in a steady stream. I learned this because Ms. Lorraine showed me her doorbell camera one morning when I brought over soup. "Look here," she said, "dates and times." The carrier set a box with a luxury logo at 10 in the morning on 3 different Thursdays. Tiffany opened the door at 10:05 and pulled it inside. It is not a crime to enjoy beauty. It is not a sin to want nice things. But the timing felt like a pebble in my shoe. Rent was being paid. So were shoes. Andre dropped a receipt on my counter by accident. It was from a spa. The amount could have filled my pantry. When I asked, he smiled and said it was a gift for Tiffany's birthday from her friend group. I nodded and tucked the paper into the binder. I told myself to stop counting what I could not control. Then late one night he called to say he would not make Sunday dinner because he had to pick up overtime at the warehouse. I said good. I said I was proud. On Sunday I saw a tagged photo of him at a day party and felt my throat tighten. Doubt sharpened when he came by in a shirt that held a new scent. The base note was his usual cologne, wood and smoke and mint. Woven through it was something floral and foreign. I asked if he had been at a store. He said the bus had been crowded. He said a woman sat close. He said anything to avoid the truth that I was not asking about perfume. I was asking about respect. I was asking about the weight of the money I was moving and the lightness with which he was carrying himself. I did not accuse. I did not chase. I watched. I cooked. I prayed. I wrote dates on tabs. I listened to the clock. Memory is a kind of investigation if you do it slow enough. When a person tells you the same promise more than twice, the promise turns thin. When a person refuses to meet your eyes, the eyes tell on them. Andre kept saying this is temporary. He kept. We returned to the table where steam drifted and the clock would not be quiet. Tiffany had just said you should be grateful we visit at all. The words sat on the plates like bones no one wanted to touch. I did not raise my voice. I did not break a dish. I pushed my chair back the way a person opens a door to air out a room that has gone stale. I faced my son. Andre, tell your wife what I have been doing for the last 6 months. Tell her who paid the rent. Tell her what left my account on the 5th of each month. My voice was low and even. It felt like a straight line after months of circles. Andre stared at his hands. The phone lit his thumb. He pressed the lock button and then pressed it again. He said nothing. Tiffany smiled the smile of a woman who believes she has the stage. She reached for her glass. She dabbed her mouth with my linen napkin. She said, "Claudia, your pudding is always sweet." She said some people confuse hospitality with control. I let the words pass. I kept my eyes on my son. "Andre," I said, "it is time. Truth is a door. Walk through it." He lifted his head. He looked at me and then looked away. He whispered, "Mom." It was a small word and it held a lifetime. He swallowed and said, "What rent?" His voice cracked on the last word as if the question scraped his throat on the way out. I felt the room lean. I felt the clock answer. Tick, tock. I let the silence stand so the weight of it could do its work. I spoke. I said, "I have paid $1,000 a month to your landlord at 420 Hamilton Street, Unit 3. I said the transfers went out on the 5th. I said I have receipts and dates and amounts. I said I sold the machine I loved and a ring I wore for 30 years so that you could sleep and call it your own roof. I did not list every sacrifice. I listed enough." The words made a clean sound in the air. The way a sharp knife makes when it meets a ripe fruit. Andre dropped his gaze. Tiffany set down her glass too fast and the stem rang on the table. She said that cannot be right. She said you must be confused. She said we handled our business. She looked at Andre and he could not look back. A flush rose up her neck. She tried a new angle. She said if you did this it was not wise. You should have asked. You should have respected our marriage. Respect, I said, is not the word I would choose for what has been happening here. Respect does not arrive in $400 shoes and call my home outdated. Respect does not let a mother cut pills in half while a daughter-in-law posts rooftop brunch. Respect asks how can we honor what has been given. Respect says thank you before it spends. Tiffany opened her mouth and then shut it. Her eyes flickered the way a light does when the power is about to go. Andre spoke at last. He said I thought it was temporary. He said I was going to make it right. He said I was ashamed. Shame had already done its harvest. It had taken his voice and left him an echo. I could feel the sorrow rise like steam. I would not let it cloud the room. There is a time to weep and a time to wash the dishes. There is also a time to set the bill on the table and read it line by line. This is that time, I said. I opened the drawer and took out the binder. I placed it next to the gravy bowl. I turned to the tab marked rent and laid out the receipts. February, March, April, May, June. I let each page sit for a beat. I let the clock speak between them. Tiffany stared. Andre rubbed his temples. I pointed to the amounts and the dates. I said count them. Then count the shoes. It was not kind but it was true. The air changed. Tiffany's posture shifted. She tried again. She said my parents are in Europe. She said we could not ask them. I said your parents live on the north side and attend Pastor Green's service when they visit you. I said Ms. Lorraine has eyes and a camera that works. Tiffany went still. The room heard a quiet crack as a mask found its seam. I felt a mix of grief and a brightness I will not call joy. Call it relief. Call it a bone set after a long ache. I turned to Andre. Son, love is action. It is not a caption. It is not a... I did not look away from either of them. The binder lay open on the table like a quiet witness. February, March, April, May, June. Each page held a transfer that left my account on the 5th. Each page carried my neat handwriting. Because when a woman stands alone with the truth, she becomes her own clerk. I slid the first receipt toward Andre. He stared at the date and winced as if the paper were hot. He whispered that he told me not to worry. Numbers do not listen, I said. They do not comfort or lie. They sit where you put them. The second receipt went to Tiffany. She inhaled and smiled thinly, searching for a new story. She said this was a misunderstanding. She said she assumed Andre had arranged a grace period. She said she never asked for charity. Charity is not what this was, I answered. This was a mother keeping a roof over heads she loved. This was a woman going without so that her son could sleep. Charity is for strangers. What I did was kinship. What you did was spend. My voice was low. I felt no need to decorate the truth. I tapped the line that showed the fee. $100 each time for a direct deposit the landlord required. The bank seal is here, I said. The initials belong to Darnell, who has worked that window 9 years. I have spelled his name 6 times this year. Tiffany lifted her chin and asked if I expected thanks. I told her I expected respect. I told her I expected silence until she found it. Andre asked me how far I had gone. Until the bottle of pills rattled with only air, I said. Until my grocery list fit on one short line. Eggs, rice, onions. Until the blue dish by the sink held no ring and my left hand felt light while my heart felt heavy. He put his palm over his eyes and drew a breath that sounded like paper tearing. Light does something to a secret. It shows the dust hanging in the room and reveals the shape of the furniture. I let the light work. I told them about the pawnbroker who weighed the ring and never looked up. I told them about bus rides to save gas. And the way my knees ached at night when the weather changed and there was no pill left to soften it. I kept my tone simple. I left a door open for dignity to walk back in if it wished. Tiffany tried a new path. She said her mother kept a clean house and never begged for attention. She said real strength was quiet and refined. My strength is quiet too, I told her. It just has calluses and receipts. I pointed to a note in the margin where I had written Andre will pay back when stable. I wrote it to keep my hope from breaking. The line looked small and brave and tired. Andre turned a page. Under the last receipt was a folded scrap. He opened it and found my list for the month. I watched his face when he read the line that said sell machine. He knew which machine. He remembered the hum that once filled this kitchen while I fed a dress under the needle and clipped threads with little silver scissors. He remembered prom girls twirling while I pinned hems so they would feel beautiful. He remembered that sound and sat very still. The clock ticked. The steam thinned. The food had gone cold. I left everything as it was and spoke with care. This is where we are, I said. We cannot go forward by pretending we are still at the start. Words cannot carry what actions refuse to lift. Tiffany, you came into my home and measured everything with another woman's yardstick. You forgot to measure your own behavior. Andre finally met my eyes. He asked me what I wanted. Justice is not a drawer with one item, I said. It holds many tools. I want you to stand up in the light and carry your life with both hands. I want you to repay what you can, not because I need the dollars but because a man who pays his debts learns to stay awake. I want one clean month without lies. Tiffany said enough. She called the conversation dramatic. She said families forgive without conditions. Forgiveness without clarity is not love, I said. Grace needs a spine. I closed the binder and left it on the table where both of you could touch it. Then I turned to the sink and washed my hands under cool water so I would not shake. When I faced them again, my voice held one more line. On the 5th of next month I will not send a transfer. The room heard that sentence and shifted. Tiffany sat straighter and flashed anger. Andre swallowed and nodded once, as if a hard truth had finally landed in a familiar place in his chest. I did not ask if they understood. I had given them the ledger. Understanding would have to find its way. Dear listener, if you are still with me, you know the first reveal is never the last. Numbers prove a pattern. Patterns point to a path. The next morning I chose to follow it and gather every piece I would need for the road ahead. Morning came clear and cool. I put on my navy cardigan, the one with the missing button at the cuff, and tied a scarf over my hair. I packed the binder in a tote. I wrote a list on an index card. Bank, landlord, building staff, Ms. Lorraine, church office. I set the kettle off the flame and told myself to be steady. A woman does not have to hurry to be strong. At the bank, Darnell lifted his eyes and smiled the way you smile at someone who has stood on the same tile for years. Miss Johnson, he said, what can I do for you? I slid the receipts through the slot and asked for stamp copies for each month. He clicked his keyboard and the printer began to hum. I listened to that hum like a hymn. The seal pressed down with a neat circle on every page. He looked up and studied my face. You all right? He asked. I said I am getting there. He nodded as if the words made a place to stand. From there I took the bus to Hamilton Street. The building lobby smelled like lemon cleaner and old carpet. Mr. Carter, the security guard with a kind voice and careful hands, sat behind the desk. He used to be a deacon. He knew my husband. Morning, Miss Claudia, he said. You need anything? I told him I needed the exact wording of the lease payment policy. He slid a laminated sheet across the desk. Payments due on the 5th. Late fee on the 6th. Digital transfers preferred. He tapped the page with a pen and said the rules were the rules for everyone. I asked if I could speak to the landlord office. A woman named Carla stepped out with a clipboard and the tired eyes of someone who has heard every story twice. I told her my name and my relationship. I told her I was the one who had been transferring the rent. She checked the file and confirmed the dates. She said the ledger was clean. She said the note on file read tenant promises new job soon. I let the words settle. Promise had been put on paper. I had been put on a wire. Carla could not share anything else without consent. I told her I did not need the private parts. I only needed the rules that applied to everyone. She printed a copy of the building policy and circled the sections on responsibility and notices. She said if the payer changes, the office must be told. I thanked her not because I liked what I heard, but because the truth deserves manners. When I left, Mr. Carter held the door and said, God keep you. I said, God keep you too. Back on my block, I stopped at Ms. Lorraine. She had her leg up on a pillow and a smile that had weathered more storms than I could count. I told her I needed to see the doorbell camera again and to save the clips. She poured sweet tea and opened the app and showed me the Thursday deliveries. She enlarged the timestamps and I wrote them down. I asked if I could email myself the clips. She said baby of course and tapped send. Then she took my hand and squeezed it and said sometimes love looks like paperwork. At home I spread everything on the table. Bank copies, policy sheets, time-stamped clips. I made a second binder labeled proof. Each section had a tab and each tab had a date. I wrote an index at the front the way the church archivist taught me. If the truth is worth keeping, it is worth making easy to find. I slipped each page into a plastic sleeve. The plastic made a soft sound when it sealed around the paper. It felt like a promise that the past would not run. I called the church office and asked to see Pastor Green. He met me in the sanctuary where the light falls in stripes through colored glass. I told him I was not here for gossip. I was here for wisdom. I sketched the situation with only the pieces that belonged to me. He listened. He did not rush to speak. Finally he said this. Public sin loves private cover. Private sin loves loud distraction. Truth loves clarity, timing, and humility. He asked me what I wanted. I told him I wanted to stop lying to myself to protect grown people. We spoke about community. We spoke about how a church is a place for confession and correction when both parties are ready. He suggested a gathering that was not framed as a trial but as a testimony service. He said if the time came for a statement, the statement should be precise and kind. He said there was a difference between humiliation and accountability. I wrote that down. I told him I needed both my hands clean and my facts straight. He said then keep doing what you are doing. I walked home past the market and bought onions and a loaf of day-old bread. The air tasted like rain. At the table that night I reviewed the clips again. I watched Tiffany lift boxes and smile at a driver. I watched my own transfers march down a page like little soldiers who never slept. I watched my handwriting hold the same shape every month. I felt no heat in my chest. Heat clouds judgment. I wanted a clear sky. I called Andre and asked him to meet me the next day. He said he was busy. I said name the time. He named a time. He did not come. I sent him a message that said we will try again tomorrow. He replied with a heart. The little red shape blinked on the screen and made me sad and tired at once. Hearts are easy. Schedules are hard. The next day he arrived late and hungry. I set a plate down and did not sit. I told him we were going to the bank together. He said why? I said because love is action. At the bank I asked Darnell to explain the transfer history aloud with Andre present. He did so gently. I watched the words land on my son. I did not reach for him. I did not rescue his face with a joke. I let the moment be heavy. When we stepped outside, Andre said I did not mean for it to be like this. I said meaning is not the same as doing. I said doing makes meaning. We walked down the block without speaking. At the corner he asked me what happened to the ring. I told him the truth. He stopped and closed his eyes. He did not apologize in that instant. He did not promise anything. He said I hear you. It was small. It was real. I let it be what it was. That evening I wrote out a plan in simple lines. Gather all proof. Set a date to speak plainly. Involve the church only if necessary. Prepare a letter with boundaries and terms. Seek legal counsel to make sure the letter has teeth and charity in the same mouth. Sleep. Pray. Eat. Call Michael back. I looked at the phone and thought of the ocean on the other side of the country. I thought of how a woman can hold two things at once. A ledger and a longing. A boundary and a blessing. I dialed Michael and listened to his steady hello. We spoke about recipes and about wind. I did not tell him the details. I told him I was doing what needed to be done. He said I always knew you would. Before bed I placed both binders on the counter and set a small bowl of marigolds beside them. The orange and yellow made a bright little sun on my old wood. I told the house we were done with shadows. I told my heart it could rest. Outside rain started. The sound was soft and exact. It sounded like a plan being written by the sky. The next morning the air felt rinsed. Rain had scrubbed the city through the night. The porch smelled like wet wood and crushed marigold. I brewed coffee and stood at the sink with my palms flat on the cool counter. I told myself to notice what was still good. My house. My breath. The little plant by the window lifting its leaves toward the light. Michael called while the cup was still hot. His voice had a way of finding me where I hid. He asked how my morning was. I said useful. He laughed softly and said that useful was a beautiful word for a woman like me. He told me about a gull that had stolen a chip from a boy on the pier, and how the boy laughed as if the bird had told a joke. I could see it even though I was far from that water. He asked if I had slept. I told him I had. I did not tell him about the line that waited on my counter. Gather all proof. Set a date. Prepare a letter. Seek counsel. Sleep. Pray. Eat. I kept the list inside my chest and let his words rinse the dust from my thoughts. He said he had found an old photo from college where I wore the red flower dress I had sewn. He said he still remembered the sound of my laugh in the practice room when a note would finally settle where it belonged. I asked him how the ocean looked that morning. He said silver, then blue, then a color he could not name. He said the water kept changing but the rocks stayed faithful. I held that image and let it sit beside the binders. Changing water. Faithful rock. A woman could be both if she chose. I told him a simple truth. I said I had been carrying more than I should. He did not ask for the weight. He told me the first rule of heavy things is this: put them down between lifts. He told me to eat something warm and open a window. He told me to take 3 slow breaths and say my own name out loud. I did it after we hung up and felt a little foolish and a little better. Dear listener, there is a reason stories like mine pause for a tender chapter before they climb again. The heart needs a resting place between storms. Mine found it in a small voice on the phone, and in the way the morning laid its gentle hands on my table. I am not a woman who needs saving. I am a woman who remembers what she is worth when someone speaks to her with care. The hope did not erase the plan. Clarified it. I called attorney Lena Patel and set an appointment for the following afternoon. I chose a simple dress and pulled my hair back. I put the binders in the tote and added a small notebook and a pen that writes clean. I ate oatmeal with sliced banana and a drizzle of honey. I washed the bowl and set it to dry. None of these acts were grand. They were faithful. On my way out, I looked at the blue dish by the sink where the ring had lived for so many years. The dish was empty. My hand looked strange without the circle it had worn since I was a young wife. I felt the sadness and did not run from it. Grief is a room in the same house as hope. You can walk through both and still end the day at the table with a warm plate. I met Lena in a small office that smelled like lemon and paper. She listened the way a good lawyer listens. With both ears and with her pencil ready. I gave her the short version and then the long one. I showed her the copies and the clips. She did not rush to speak. She built a square set of steps I could climb. Demand letter. Terms. Timeline. This then that. She said we would not scream. We would file. She said we would center facts and let feelings follow behind like children, who could not lead but could still be loved. When I left her office, the sun broke through and turned the sidewalk into mirrors. I stopped at a bakery and bought 1 slice of lemon cake. I ate it on a bench and let the sugar wake a part of me that had been asleep. The world did not change in that moment. I did. I chose to enjoy something with no duty attached. That evening I called Michael back and told him about the cake. He said good. He said a day that holds both lemon and plan is a day that honors God. We did not speak long. We did not have to. He said sleep well, Claudia. I said you too. I stood at the window and watched the light go. Tomorrow would ask for courage. Tonight had asked for softness. I gave each what they needed. Sunday arrived bright and clear, too beautiful for what was about to unfold. I sat at the long table in the church fellowship hall, where the light through the stained windows turned the floor into colored squares. Pastor Green had agreed to hold what he called a family meeting under the roof of grace. I brought my binder and my calm. Tiffany came in first, heels clicking like punctuation marks. Andre followed behind, eyes lowered, hands empty. Neighbors had gathered for the afternoon choir practice, but word travels fast. People lingered, pretending to stack chairs or tune instruments. I didn't stop them. Community, when it listens, becomes a witness. Pastor Green began with a prayer about truth. He said truth is not a weapon, it's a light. He asked if we understood. I nodded. Tiffany smiled as if she were in control of the scene. I opened the binder. The sound of the clips unlocking echoed in the wide room. I said, I was told I should be grateful for visits. I was told that I interfere. But this right here is what gratitude looks like. I slid the stamped receipts onto the table. I explained the timeline, the 5th of each month, transfers marked, fees paid. The choir mothers looked at one another and whispered, "Lord have mercy." Tiffany leaned back, laughing under her breath. "This is not necessary," she said. "You're making a spectacle of yourself." I looked at her. A spectacle is what you make when you live off someone else's sacrifice and call it partnership. Pastor Green raised his hand gently. "Sister Claudia, what outcome do you hope for?" "Clarity," I said. "And boundaries." Andre finally spoke. His voice was small but steady. "She's right. Mama's been paying it all." He turned toward his wife. "You knew, Tiffany. You knew the money didn't come from me." Her face hardened. "I thought it was a gift. Families help each other." "Help ends when it's hidden," I said. The room grew still. Only the slow hum of the air conditioner filled the silence. Then Ms. Lorraine, who had slipped in quietly, raised her phone. "I have those delivery clips," she said. "Just so folks don't get confused about where the money went." The video played softly. The boxes, the timestamps, Tiffany at the door smiling for the camera. Murmurs rippled. No one shouted. The evidence spoke in full sentences. Tiffany stood, cheeks flushed. "This is humiliation." "No," I said. "This is daylight. Humiliation happens in the dark." Pastor Green bowed his head. "We have all learned something here. Let us close with prayer." I gathered my papers. Andre followed me to the door, but Tiffany stayed seated, staring at her reflection in the window glass. Outside the air was cooler. My knees trembled a little. Ms. Lorraine touched my arm. "You did it right," she said. "No screaming, no cursing. Just truth." I nodded. The truth had been a long time coming. The next week unfolded like slow thunder. Andre called to say Tiffany had gone to stay with her mother. He sounded hollow, like a house with no furniture. I told him separation can be a kind of mercy when lies have been evicted. He said he was trying to fix things. I told him fixing starts with repayment, not flowers. I went back to Attorney Patel to draft the repayment plan. She typed in neat lines. $1,000 monthly until the total was returned. Signed copies would be notarized. Lena said, "This isn't vengeance. It's structure." Andre signed the document without argument. His hands shook, but his eyes met mine for the first time in months. He said, "I didn't know how to stop lying." I said, "You just did." Tiffany sent a message 3 days later. It was short. "I never meant harm." I didn't reply. Silence is a response too, one that doesn't need punctuation. The neighborhood buzzed for a while. Ms. Lorraine said the ladies at choir practice called me the quiet storm. I laughed. It was better than being called a fool. On Sunday, Pastor Green used my story in his sermon. He didn't use names, but everyone knew. He said, "Grace and accountability share the same table. If you remove one, the meal spoils." The congregation hummed in agreement. Andre began visiting again, not with gifts but with actions. He mowed the lawn. He fixed the loose porch step. He asked if I needed groceries. He didn't mention money. He simply left envelopes in the kitchen drawer marked repayment. The handwriting was uneven but honest. Months passed. Tiffany's name became a memory that no longer stung. I saw her once in the grocery store parking lot. She looked smaller somehow, not in body but in presence. She nodded. I nodded back. No words needed. Michael kept calling every few evenings. His laughter became a light in the darker corners of my days. He sent a photograph of the ocean at sunset with a note. "Still changing colors. Still waiting when you're ready." I taped it to the fridge near the old picture of Charles. Both men had been good to me in their own seasons, one in memory, one in promise. One afternoon, Andre brought Leo, my grandson, to visit. The boy ran through the house like sunlight. He pointed at the marigolds on the porch and said, "Grandma, these flowers look like fire." I smiled and said, "Fire that doesn't burn, only warms." That night, when the house was quiet, I opened the binder again. The final page now read balance, paid in full. I pressed my palm over the paper and whispered a prayer. Let the lesson stay paid too. It has been 1 year since that dinner when my chair scraped the floor and the truth found its voice. My house smells of lemon polish and fresh bread. The blue dish by the sink now holds a small gold ring Michael sent for my birthday. Not a promise ring, Just a symbol, he said, of shared light. Every morning I walk 3 blocks to the community center where I help run the Claudia Johnson Peace Fund, a small scholarship for young women studying law or finance. Attorney Patel helped set it up. The first award went to a student who wrote an essay about integrity. She began her speech with the words, "My grandmother taught me that silence is not weakness." I had to blink fast to keep my vision clear. Andre visits on Sundays with Leo. They bring groceries and stories. Sometimes we sit on the porch and talk about the years that hurt and the years that healed. He told me he started saving for his own house. I said, "Make sure it's one built with honesty. The walls will last longer." Tiffany never returned, but I heard she found work out of state. I wish her no harm. Everyone deserves a chapter where they learn. Michael came to visit that spring. When I saw him at the airport gate holding flowers, I felt my breath catch the way it once did when I was a girl. We spent days cooking, walking, and talking about small things that add up to peace. He said he loved the way my home smelled like sugar and truth. The community still whispers my story sometimes, but in tones of respect now. They call me the woman who kept receipts and her dignity. I smile because both are true. If you're listening to me from your kitchen, your car, or your porch swing, hear this: betrayal doesn't end you. It instructs you. Justice isn't revenge. It's balance restored. And silence, when chosen, can be louder than any shout. When the sun sets, I light one candle and write one line in my journal. Still standing. Still grateful. Did you like my story? Where are you listening from tonight? 2 weeks after the family meeting, Pastor Green called and asked if I would offer a testimony at the end of Sunday service. He said the message was not about scandal. He said it was about stewardship and boundaries. I asked for one day to pray. I sat at my table with the blue dish and the marigolds, and I asked God for a tongue that could bless and cut only what needed cutting. On Sunday, the sanctuary filled with the smell of starch and perfume. I took my seat on the front pew with my binder closed on my lap. I was not there to fight. I was there to tell the truth and then sit down. Pastor preached from Proverbs. He spoke about scales and honest weights. He said a house stands when every beam carries its share. When he finished, he nodded to me. My name was called. I stood and walked to the pulpit that had held so many confessions and so many songs. I told the church a simple story. A mother loved. A son drifted. A wife spent what was not hers. A kitchen became a courtroom and then a classroom. I said that secrets grow where receipts are not kept. I said that love without boundaries is sentiment, not strength. I said that silence is not weakness, but it is not a permanent address either. I did not name names. I did not point. I held up the binder and showed the tabs. I said these are not weapons. They are memories that behave. Paper can keep us honest when our mouths cannot. I thanked Darnell for stamps and Ms. Lorraine for cameras and Pastor for timing. Then I looked at the congregation and I spoke to the women who had given and given until the edges of their lives had rubbed thin. I said, listen to me. You are not a spare part. You are not a silent wallet. You are not the last seat at a table you built. Your love is real. Your money is real. Put your name on your giving. Put your voice on your name. There was a murmur, then a hush. I felt the room lean toward me like a friend. I said one more thing. I said restoration is possible where truth is welcome. I said I had seen a man begin to wake up when he signed his name to what he owed. I said I hoped that woman would find her own corner of the world where she could learn to stand without leaning on anyone else's bank account. I asked the church to pray for all of us. Then I stepped back. I was ready to sit. Pastor raised a hand and asked if anyone else wished to speak before the benediction. Andre stood. He walked to the pulpit with his hands open. He did not bring notes. He brought a face I had not seen since he was a boy who had done wrong and wanted to do right. He cleared his throat and the sound caught in his chest. He said, Mama. He said, church. He said, I have been a selfish man. He said, I let pride make me soft and I let lies make me small. He said, I wanted to look like a provider more than I wanted to be one. He said, my mother kept me alive while I pretended I was standing. He said, I am sorry. He did not cry, but his voice broke like ice that gives way under too much weight. He said, I am paying back what I can. He said, I am showing up where I promised to show up. He said, I am learning to say no to myself so I can say yes to what is right. He asked the church to hold him to that. He asked me to forgive him. He said, I know forgiveness is not the same thing as access. The church was silent but not empty. It was full of breath and heat and something like mercy. Pastor placed a hand on Andre's shoulder and prayed a short prayer that sounded like a door unlocking. When he finished, the congregation said amen in one long wave. I started down the aisle to return to my seat. That was when Tiffany stood from the back row. I had not seen her come in. She wore a dark dress and no makeup. She looked younger and older at the same time. She asked if she could speak. Pastor looked at me. I nodded once. She walked to the front and stood 3 steps from the pulpit. She folded her hands. Her voice at first was flat. Then it steadied. She said, I did not grow up with a mother like yours. She said, I learned early that image was armor. She said, I liked the way new things could make a bad week feel far away. She said, I used the help and called it blessing, but I did not honor the cost. She did not apologize with grand words. She said, I am sorry. She said, I know it will not fix what I broke. She said, I am leaving to be with my family for a while to work and to be quiet. She asked the church to release her from the center of the story. She asked God to help her break the habit of looking at herself through the eyes of strangers. There was no applause. There was no scolding. Pastor said, may the Lord teach us all. He lifted his hands for the benediction. While we bowed our heads, I felt a lightness near my ribs where a tightness had lived for months. It was permission to stop pushing and let the river carry the rest. After service, people lined up with hugs and whispers. Ms. Lorraine pressed my fingers and said that public truth had been a clean wind. For us all. The choir director handed me a plate of chicken and green beans for later. Darnell laughed and said I had made his stamp famous. Even the children seemed to run softer in the aisles. At home, I placed the binder on the shelf beside the cookbooks. It did not belong on the table anymore. I brewed tea and set 1 cup on the other side of the table where my husband used to sit. I told him what had happened and I thanked him for the way he had taught me to keep flour in the bin and peace in the house. That evening, Andre came by with Leo. They did not stay long. They left the porch smarter with laughter and the smell of grass on shoes. When the door closed, I sat alone and listened for sadness. It did not knock. I listened for pride. It did not crow. What came was quiet. What stayed was peace. I wrote 1 sentence in my journal. The scales are honest now. Then I turned out the light and slept the kind of sleep that does not bargain with the morning. The week after the testimony, I opened the windows and let the house breathe. Sun warmed the floor. Peace felt like someone had finally sat down. Andre came by on Wednesday with a sack of groceries. He chopped onions and I stirred the pot. We worked in a quiet rhythm. He said grace. He took the trash out and left an envelope in the drawer. He did not ask me to open it. I saw Tiffany once more before she left town. It was in front of the clinic on Maple. She held a folder and wore a tired scarf. We stood like 2 people who had survived the same storm in different houses. She said she was going to her mother to work and be quiet. I said take care. We parted in quiet. At night, Michael and I talked about little things. He told me a cafe near the water made a lemon tart that could make a person sing. I told him our church had a coat drive and the children laughed under a pile of scarves. Those small moments stack into peace. One afternoon, I took the binder down and removed the plastic sleeves. I put the pages in a plain file and slid it into the cabinet where I keep taxes and warranties. The binder was too heavy for what the house needed now. I washed it and left it empty on a shelf for a new purpose. That was when the grief came in a soft wave. Not for money. For what the years had taught me about love without direction. I sat at the table and let the tears fall and did not call them weakness. They were a rinse for the heart. When I finished, I wrote 1 line on an index card and taped it to the inside of the cabinet door. Love is action with a spine. Andre began bringing Leo to help in the yard on Saturdays. The boy learned to pull weeds by the root and not just tear leaves. He liked that lesson. He said it felt like solving a puzzle. I showed him how to water the marigolds at the base and not flood the blossoms. We ate popsicles on the steps and he asked if the ocean was really bigger than a lake. I told him yes, and that one day soon I hoped to show him. The neighborhood felt different. Not because the gossip stopped. Gossip never stops. It just grows bored when you refuse to feed it. People waved with respect. They asked for my cobbler recipe with a real please. I took a tray to the new widow on Pine and we talked about how silence at night can ring like a bell until you learn to bless it. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, I pulled a small suitcase from the closet. I laid a navy dress and a white sweater across the bed. I added a pair of soft shoes and the scarf that makes me feel like a woman who knows where she is going. I placed my journal on top. The ticket was not booked yet. Hope does not need a number to begin packing. Before sleep, I stepped onto the porch. The marigolds burned their small suns in the dusk. The air smelled like cut grass and rain far away. I thought of the table where the clock had once been loud enough to drown my courage. It ticks steady now. Not louder. True. Dear listener, if you are here with me at this hour, take this with you. Betrayal will try to name you. Do not answer to it. Investigation will tire you. Rest anyway. Justice will arrive in a plain envelope without music. Open it. Let the public light do what it does. Then close the file and cook your supper and bless your own name. A woman can begin again at any age. I am proof. So are you. Spring leaned over my porch with soft light and the smell of wet earth. I brewed coffee and opened the window. The house breathed with me. On the table lay a simple envelope from Attorney Patel. Inside was a one-page summary. Repayment on schedule. No arrears. No disputes. At the bottom was a short line in her careful script. You kept your word. They are learning to keep theirs. I set the paper under the blue dish and felt something inside me settle. Andre arrived that afternoon with Leo. They brought oranges and a loaf of bread warm from the bakery. Leo ran to the marigolds and cupped one blossom in both hands as if it were a small sun. Andre watched me with the sober look a man wears when he knows a bridge held. He asked if I needed anything fixed. I told him the porch light had begun to flicker. He fetched a bulb from the closet and a step stool from the shed. He changed it without a word. Then he stood there with the new light over his shoulder, and for one quiet second I saw him at 10 years old again, proud to be useful. We sat at the table and ate bread with butter and orange slices. Andre said, "Mama, I am seeing a counselor at the community center." I nodded. He said I wanted attention more than I wanted responsibility. The counselor says attention is a cheap sugar. Responsibility is bread. He looked at the slice in his hand and laughed without shame. He said I like bread. I told him I did too. He told me he had taken a second shift on weekends. He told me his first savings account had a balance that made him stand taller. He did not brag. He reported. That was its own kind of music. When they left, I pulled my suitcase from the closet and set it on the bed. The ticket to Seattle was booked for late summer. A flight that would cross mountains and carry me to water I had only seen in pictures. Michael called that night and we spoke about small things that add up to a life. He said the camellias had opened like patient stars. He said the wind off the water could almost sing. I told him I had chosen 3 dresses and 1 scarf and a good pair of walking shoes. I told him I was bringing my journal. He said bring your appetite. He said bring your laughter. The next week Pastor Green asked if I would help with a new class at the church. Budget basics for women. We made a list on a yellow pad. Checking. Savings. Receipts. Boundaries with love. I brought my empty binder to the first session and set it on the table. I told the women what the binder had held and why it now held air. I said a binder is a tool. It is not a burden. Fill it when you need to stand. Empty it when the standing is done. 12 heads nodded. 12 pins moved. A dozen little houses would breathe easier by winter. Ms. Lorraine knocked one morning with a pie tin and news. Her nephew had found steady work at the shipping yard. She said your story had him thinking about his grandmother and the way she used to keep cash in coffee tins. She laughed and pressed the pie into my hands and told me to eat while it was still kind. We sat at the table with forks and no plates and the clock ticked like a friend. I wrote to Tiffany. The letter was short and exact. I wished her steadiness. I wished her honest work. I wished her a mirror that told the truth without cruelty. I did not ask for answers. I let the stamp do the rest. Before dusk on a quiet Thursday, I walked to the community center with a folder marked Peace Fund. The director showed me a room with a long table and clean chairs. He said our next award would go to a student from the neighborhood who had helped her mother with bills since middle school. We read her essay together. She wrote that justice was not a loud song. It was a rhythm under the day. I signed the letter and slipped it into an envelope that would change the shape of one young life. Michael sent a small package the week before my flight. Inside was a guidebook with handwritten notes in the margins. Try the chowder on page 46. Sit on the bench by the third pier after 5 in the afternoon. Bring a sweater even when the sun says you will not need one. I laughed and folded the list into my journal. Then I stood very still in my kitchen and let the feeling rise. It was not excitement alone. It was something older and sweeter. Permission. Permission to be a woman with a plan that belonged to no one else. On my last evening before travel, I sat on the porch with a glass of sweet tea. The new porch light burned steady over my head. Andre and Leo waved from the sidewalk and promised to water the marigolds while I was away. I blew them a kiss and watched them turn the corner. The night air smelled like cut grass and faraway rain. I whispered a line I had told so many women in the church kitchen after a long day. You may begin again. Then I closed the screen door and packed the scarf that makes me feel like a woman who knows where she is going. The plane lifted through a thin veil of cloud and the city turned to patchwork below. I closed my eyes and felt the weight fall from my shoulders in inches. The hum of the cabin steadied like a long note held by a choir that knows where the song will land. When we descended, the coast lay under us like a wide silver ribbon. I touched the window with my fingertips the way a child touches a dream to be sure it is there. Michael stood by the gate with flowers from a market stall and a grin that warmed the chill air. He looked older than the boy I knew and kinder than the world had any right to deliver. We drove along a road that rolled between water and evergreens. He pointed out the place where the gulls would quarrel over chips and the docks where the tide had its say. At his house a kettle sang while he hung my coat and asked if I was ready for soup. I was ready for soup. I was ready for quiet. I was ready to be spoken to with care. The days unfolded with a clean rhythm. Morning walks where fog lifted like a curtain. Afternoons where we cooked and told small stories. Evenings on the deck with bowls and spoons and the distant sound of a bell somewhere on the water. He showed me the bench by the third pier. We sat there and shared a pastry and watched the light choose its colors. He did not make big promises. He made room for me to breathe. I wrote in my journal each night. One line only. Day 1. The ocean changes and still keeps its name. Day 2. Peace can be a task you practice. Day 3. A woman may be both rock and wave. On the 6th night I added a 4th line. I am still Claudia. That is enough and more than enough. Back home Andre kept his word. He texted a photo of the marigolds standing like small suns on the porch. He sent pictures of Leo stirring batter with both hands and a serious face. He wrote a sentence that made me pause. I am learning to enjoy my own company and still be a man who serves. I read it twice and pressed a palm to my chest, then sent back a simple heart. The red shape was not lazy this time. It was earned. I walked with Michael down a street where musicians played soft songs with buckets at their feet. He dropped a bill and tipped his cap. We sat on a low wall and watched people go by. He asked what I wanted next, not from him but from myself. I said I wanted to keep teaching women how to bind their money to their values. I said I wanted to return in the fall and cook at the church harvest supper. I said I wanted a porch where my grandson could sit with a book and a slice of pie. He said all of that sounded like a life with a spine and a smile. On my last morning by the water he took my picture with the sky behind me and handed me the print from a small instant camera. A woman looked back who had lines at the corners of her eyes and a gaze that did not flinch. I slid the picture into my journal next to the guidebook note about the chowder. We drove to the airport without hurry. At the curb he took my hands and said, "Thank you for bringing your honest self all this way." I told him thank you for making room for it. We did not declare anything. We agreed to keep showing up. When I stepped onto my porch again, the house welcomed me with its lemon shine and its faithful clock. Andre and Leo had left a note on the table. "Welcome home, Grandma. We made a pie and did not taste it yet." The pie waited under a clean towel like a promise. I lifted the towel and smiled at the neat crust and the little vents cut like leaves. We ate with forks and laughter at the counter. After they left I washed the plates and wrote my nightly line. Still standing. Still grateful. Dear listener, if you have traveled this road with me, take these truths with you. Betrayal may bend you. It does not have the right to define you. Investigation is not meanness. It is a form of love that refuses to be blind. Justice is not a scream. It is a clear sentence with dates and amounts that lets a life stand straight. Public light is not cruelty when it is timed with care. It is a mercy that stops a wrong from walking further. Rebirth is not fireworks. It is a porch light that burns steady after you change the bulb. I am a woman in her season who kept receipts and kept her dignity. I am a mother who learned that love needs a spine and a boundary. I am a believer who knows that grace and truth can sit at the same table and pass each other the bread. If you are beginning again, begin. If you are tired, rest. If you are afraid to speak, practice on paper and then say the line out loud when the clock has your back. Did you like my story? Where are you listening from tonight? Tell me one boundary you kept this year and one hope you are packing for your next trip.